Hi, everyone. This is Ken Anderson at IntelliChief. Just in about 1 minute, we're going to start discovering end-to-end benefits of AP automation for EBS. So if you're here to learn about that, you're in the right spot. If it's something else, you can hang out, but you're not going to, we're going to be talking about EBS. So 1 more minute. All right. I think we're ready to rock and roll. It's 2 o'clock. So again, thank you for joining me. My name is Ken Anderson. I'm here at IntelliChief. And this webinar today we'll be talking about discovering end-to-end benefits of AP automation, and with the caveat integrated to Oracle's EBS system. So everything we talk about obviously can apply to other ERPs, except the integration pieces that we talk about. Those, in this case anyway, are very specific to EBS. So let's go ahead and get started. So at the end, if you have any questions or along the way, just submit them into the right-hand side there. You'll see a piece that allows you to put a question in there. You can shoot that over to either me directly or the whole team. So go ahead and do that along the way. So the agenda today is really, we want to talk about, if you're not familiar with this, I know there's some existing or current users of IntelliChief on the call, but some of the folks may not be familiar with us at all. And so we'll just tell you who we are. We'll talk about the benefits we see out there that folks talking to us are looking for in an AP automation system, that and combined with what's called ECM, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll show you how our sort of approach to doing AP automation, some of the key integration points and considerations with respect to EBS that are sort of critical. Some apply to everybody, but these are integration components of where tables we have to hit and so forth in EBS, and then any next step questions, etc. So what are we? Well, we're a content management system. So that's what IntelliChief is as a product, if you will. And what does ECM really mean? I know we're focused, or going to be focused today a lot on the accounts payable side, but an ECM system really allows you to manage content anywhere in the organization and integrate with what our claim to fame, if you will, or view of the world, is that it integrates to a core or line of business application like Oracle EBS. And so, again, we're talking a lot about AP, but what a lot of folks will start there and typically transition into, sort of the same concepts. Instead of reading invoices and creating a voucher, we read customer purchase orders, for example, and create a sales order. So, or in the human resources side, potentially doing, automating the onboarding process, or, other processes, if you will. So that's what an ECM is. And, so it can be used a lot of different areas within the organization. So who are we? Well, I'm here at our world headquarters in Tampa, Florida. North American headquarters is in Massachusetts, just outside Boston. He's getting a whole bunch of snow today. So we're an ISV. So what that means is we're not really a reseller of a third-party tool. We actually develop the IntelliChief product, do tech support here in the U.S., do the implementations, all that good stuff. So that's us as an organization. We've got obviously a ton of customers out there. Some you probably recognize if you've gone to some of the EBS local user groups and so forth. And we really focus a lot on automating some business process, with AP being a big one because it's sort of the most common or the first one people really choose to look at. So let's get into AP. So what are the benefits, or why do people, really try to look at this type of thing? And so these are the things that we get from our customers when they're trying to look at a solution. Obviously, we say, well, why do you want to do this, right? And so the biggest one by far is eliminating all manual data entry. So that's usually the first foray into the AP automation, is I got to get rid of I have to get rid of people having to key information into the system. The next is usually when, almost half of the installs are replacing some tool that does usually imaging stuff. And folks want to get to this concept of straight through processing. And so I'll just quickly define straight through processing that's really the measure of, if I'm talking AP, how many invoices come into my organization, match against the receipts or, purchase order line data, and are automatically create the voucher in the system, right? That's straight through processing. So the higher that is, the better it is, right? Because I don't have to have, folks, in there doing anything manually. A lot of people want to maximize early pay discounts, eliminate duplicate payments. That's usually once if someone has that, then it's they recognize that as an issue, and it's typically a secondary requirement. Reduce or reallocate resources in the organization, i.e., reduce the back office staff size, automate the process so that the people who are in AP only have to focus on exceptions instead of having to do sort of the day-to-day monotonous work. And a big one is increasing the process visibility, the ability to tell what's happening in my organization. What's my received not vouchered look like today or this week, or how many invoices am I processing, or how quickly, what's my cycle time, those kinds of things. And being able to now measure those things because you have a standardized process versus somebody just keying something into the system. So there's a lot of sort of AP only type tools out there. And then, I said earlier, we were an ECM or content management system, right? And so just want to, again, make the differentiation there because, AIM, who is the body of folks who sort of quote regulate the industry, or at least report on our industry. And, they go to people and do surveys about content. And they said, what is the largest content related business challenge you have today? And one of the biggest ones, or the biggest one, was that there's information in silos really across the, whole enterprise in different applications and repositories and, the ability to find things. So what an ECM allows you to do is really, take what we're talking about here in AP and apply it across the enterprise to give people access to the content that they need when they need it and automate a business process. So that's really kind of one of the big pieces out there. Whereas, if I'm just doing sort of invoice processing, it doesn't really, impact the entire organization, if you will. So why do people do it? Well, obviously, return on investment, right? Those are a lot of the big things that we've looked at here. But at the end of the day, a manual system takes, on average, 16 and a half days to process an invoice, where someone best in class or using an automated AP system is looking at 2.9 days. And what they've done here is combine, this is Aberdeen Group, combine your non-PO and your PO or your expense, MRO, et cetera, in with your, inventory or PO-based invoices, and really a significant reduction in cycle time. And then ultimately that leads to cost, right? $16 to process an invoice versus $334. And then the ability to take early pay discounts when you want to, if you will, because you could take 100% if you have the ability to process an invoice in the timeline you want. And so the best in class is processing or taking 90% of their early pay discounts without having to sort of look on a spreadsheet to figure out who we're going to pay and not pay. So some of the unique challenges with respect to an AP automation tool and things we need to think about. What does the process look like today, right? Forgetting about softwares and technologies, how does it work now? And when you've got multiple approvals, routing, processing, et cetera, multiple locations, that becomes a challenge to really look at from an AP automation perspective. Then once I have a tool in place, right, and if I've got an approval matrix into the tool to help in processing non-PO, What's the out of office approach or delegation of authority when something happens, right? If I've got a complicated AP process, I need to do four-way match because I have to match against some other document for quality, for example. Part numbers, we're going to talk a little bit about this in a minute, but the supplier, very simple thing, supplier uses a different part number than what you put on your PO. Well, when you're talking AP automation, if those don't match, that can impact our ability to do straight through processing. Duplicate invoices, we talked about, visibility to the routing, coding of taxes, freight, VAT, other charges that might appear on your invoice that have to be coded interactively or by somebody, and how do I access GL codes that come from EBS? Simple things, PO quantities are different from a unit of measure perspective than an invoice quantity, right? I ordered I ordered units or pieces on my PO and purchasing, but I was invoiced in a gross or a pallet or a metric ton or some other, methodology. Well, that will throw a curve to an AP automation system because if it's only comparing the data. And then, of course, if you have to approve or code things in the field, folks who don't have access to EBS. So AP automation helps you get over a lot of those things, right? Obviously giving you the ability to scan things, and this is probably the least productive way to process from an AP perspective, but we all have those suppliers that just simply still send in, paper invoices. So of course you need the ability to scan those, store them electronically, and then using some tool like an OCR type technology that can read the content off of the page and then turn around and do something with it. Automatically import emailed invoices. So if I can transition folks to an email address and just say, even smaller vendors, give them an incentive to send you those, right? They can be captured automatically without anybody having to scan anything. So the scanning theoretically takes place on the vendor side. Capturing data off of the invoices, right? However it comes in, and then validating it against what's in the system. So reading the vendor, the supplier master, reading terms tables, reading the receipt table, reading what you ordered from the PO table, etc., in real time, so that we can process things very quickly. And of course, give people the ability to capture and code things like tax and freight remote, right? Either in the field at a job site or, maybe in their home office like today. Routing non-PO, of course, and putting in rules so it always happens the same way, and then having the ability to track that information to determine, how long it's taking those late approval folks to get something approved. Integrating that GL process with the mobile device, I kind of touched on that. And ultimately creating the voucher in EBS, right? That's a critical piece of the puzzle. So we've got all this data, we've pulled it off the invoice, we've made sure everything's been received, that matches the PO, automatically creating that voucher so the user doesn't have to do anything, and your IT group doesn't have to do it either. And then the two or three-way match process on the PO side, which is a critical one. And analytics, I forgot to mention analytics across the way. So anything captured into the system is now measurable, right? We have a standardized process, and we have the ability to look, build dashboards, create your own dashboards, but basically analyze what the process is and look for those bottlenecks to fix them. So to kind of see this in a different way from, how does this work perspective? Well, invoices come in, right? They come into your AP team. If we were using IntelliChief, they could be physical paper or digital copies, emailed, etc. And the first thing that happens is once they come in, they're a digital image, and then they are automatically processed through what's called workflow. And the workflow is what's going to determine the rules about what to do with this type of invoice, right? And then the next piece is, and that's based on maybe where it came from, right? It was sent to me from Ken at IntelliChief. So the first thing is to route that's this kind of invoice, and then send it over to what we call Capture Enterprise. And one of its tools is the ability to read or recognize using an OCR engine what's on the document, actually read the data off of the document using this Capture Enterprise tool. So that will convert it into an image into text. And now what the next step is going to be is to turn around and take that text that we have and validate it. So here's just a quick image so you can kind of see what's happening. A lot of this happens behind the scenes, but you see on the right-hand side, you've got an image of an invoice. And on the left-hand side, it's pulled out all the header information. It's pulled out the, tax and freight and all the detail lines and footer information, basically all the content that a user used to go and key into EBS. So now we just apply the workflow rules, right, to validate this. So we turn around and say, is this a valid supplier? Did we read the PO correctly? All that good stuff happens in workflow. Now, meanwhile, as the system is gathering this data or metadata to learn about what this document is that it has captured, it's also capturing and putting it into a document repository. So now it's a digital image. And if I wanted to, I could go over to, say, invoice inquiry, press a button, pull it up, pull up the PO. I can see that or any other documents associated with the transaction I'm looking at. Then it will go through its matching process. If it's PO based, apply those rules, right? Look at the PO table, look at the receipt table. Has everything been received against this invoice? If everything matches here, there's not going to be any user matching, right? The system's doing this all behind the scenes. If everything matches and falls within the tolerances that your organization is okay with, it will turn around and create the voucher right in EBS. So non-PO, on the other hand, right, there's nothing to match against there. There we've got maybe an MRO or an expense invoice of some kind. Now that's a non-PO. We're going to base that on some of your business processes, right? So workflow picks that up and says, okay, what are our rules surrounding this particular invoice? And on the left-hand side, you can kind of see what we've done as an example. You've got a bunch of what we call inboxes over there. We've read this invoice and now sent it out maybe for approval, and it can be tracked. So I sent it to Sarah to be approved, and it's been sitting there for 2 days. Do I have to alert her to do something about it, or do I simply reroute that to her manager or something like that? So when I get something to approve, there's lots of ways to do it, but here's an example. This image came in, and workflow sent this user a message and said, hey, we want you to do something with this. Now, the little pop-up right there, this is asking, has it been successfully matched? But it's asking the user effectively in English, here's what you have to do. And it gives them a series of choices. Now, these choices and the question, in fact, are configurable to whatever you would normally ask them, say in an email if you had sent this to somebody. So that it's very clear what they have to do next. So now that we have that in there, right, we've routed all this stuff, it's all approved, everything's good. At that point, now we create the voucher in EBS, and then when EBS assigns its voucher number to it, it actually sends the voucher number back to IntelliChief. Now our transaction is complete, if you will. We could do the payment. So that's a real quick run through of it, but how does it work? Let's talk about how it's doing these things from an integration standpoint for some of the folks on the call that might be on the IT side. Well, obviously we're an Oracle partner, right? We built a full integration into EBS and a lot of other ERP systems as well, because some people use multiple. But all that said, really this isn't going to be stuff that your organization has to build on its own. It's all built into our EBS integration. So it's a critical piece to the puzzle. So let's look at sort of how it does it. Well, we use this concept of what are called real-time lookups, and that's what allows us to validate data literally in real time, right? So we'll go back to EBS and grab the information we need And it's really the same information that a user would go look up if they were keying this into the system. So we'll check out the AP suppliers table, the invoice table, PO headers and PO lines, all your GL code combinations. These are the tables we're hitting in real time to determine, does this match, or is this a valid supplier? Just examples of which EBS tables we look at. So continue to talk about real-time lookups. So workflow really is a component of the IntelliChief tool that's managing this process of, because at the end of the day, again, the objective is to get straight through processing. So what this workflow tool does is it's what's managing that process, trying to determine what to do next, if you will, right? So invoices where items have not been received, those go right into workflow. So an invoice comes in, we got the PO matches, but this is a three-way match, but nothing has arrived yet. Well, that will go into what's called invoices waiting on receipts, and the system will continue to check the receipt table to determine when that's been received. Obviously, if this is a two-way match, then we wouldn't need to do that, but that depends on what your business process is, and that's how it's configured in workflow. Once everything gets received, the match process will happen automatically. And you could put in timeouts and all that kind of stuff in the setup of this, or just simply say, you know what, we never received that after 14 days, routed to a user, and they have to do something. Alert them, hey, do you want to find out what's happened to this? But once it's received, the match process happens automatically. The user doesn't have to check anything or do anything. It's working in real time, if you will. Excuse me. So why is real time important? Well, obviously it allows it to happen as soon as the data is available, right? In a three-way match, for example, it's very common that you send your order to the supplier and they automatically send you an invoice, right? So say you receive the invoice, immediately, and then a day or two after that nothing has arrived, if you will. Well, the invoice can't be matched, and so we don't want somebody to have to continue to go in and find out when the stuff is received before, attempting the match. Well, the real-time system allows you to effectively check and ensure. And so if I ordered quantity of 10 and I've received 5, it will actually put it back into workflow, wait the prescribed amount of time as it's checking your receipt table to see if the other 5 have been received, and then ultimately it would create the voucher in the system if it found it. But it's automatically checking that, and the user doesn't have to go in there and really look at that one. So matching is critical. I mean, we support all kinds of different matching, two-way matches, four-way. We can match against any sort of criteria, but the automated matching in real time is really a critical step for this concept of straight-through processing. We don't want to give users things to do that are sort of monotonous, that the system can learn on its own, if you will. So STP, or straight-through processing, that's your automation. So if we can do it, your users don't have to touch it at all. And the only thing the user is working on are true exceptions where something is out of tolerance, if you will. So obviously we do that in conjunction with EBS. We identify the PO number, the item number ID, unit price, line total, really everything. Again, if we're talking about a three-way match, everything that we need to know about what you purchased, what was received, and then what was ultimately invoiced by the supplier. We also keep track of open PO quantities and receipt quantities. So when lines are matched, so if I have folks doing blanket orders and so forth, this applies really to you, like I'm buying raw materials for off a contract. Some of the match methods we use, exact match, first in, first use, combination of all those, basically what you would use in your organization anyway. We support variances, percent, amount, type, by invoice type, etc. So really, comprehensive in terms of how you operate. So if you were to ever call us and say, hey, I want to do this AP thing, we would probably start with, forget about us. How does your process work now? So we talked about the the matching process, and this is a real challenge when you're trying to get straight through processing. So when somebody invoices you for items but uses a different item number on the invoice from what was on your PO, right? That happens all the time. You could be using the cross-reference table, but again, that's typically going to be set up by purchasing, right? So they invoice for you in a quantity of items using a different unit of measure. So when a PO is generated, it's ordered in units as an example, and then when you get invoiced, it's in pallets or however the supplier decides to invoice you there. Well, that's an important concept because that doesn't match, right? And so what happens in real life is users are actually doing something about that. They're going and probably looking up to a table in EBS to determine, okay, does that part number match? Or they just know, right? It's tribal knowledge. But the part numbers not matching, that's going to create a problem in terms of the tool. So we have ways around that. And then, of course, the EBS integration module that we've been talking about, where the data is formatted based on what Oracle expects. So at the end, when we've sort of done all this good stuff and created, everything we need, right? We format it according to the EBS interface guidelines, and then it's passed through Open Payables interface import right into the Payables Open Interface table, right? That protects the database integrity, and then it also notifies the system, our system, of any errors so that a user can, sort of take control of that. So we'll get feedback about the upload from invoices and be able to determine what went in, what was correct, not correct, etc., and typically route that to a user if they need to. So we talked about the item number cross-reference. We can read the part numbers in EBS, right? We can match the ordering part number to the invoice part number right in the cross-reference table. But as I said, almost no one uses that, and it's typically not maintained. Well, if I'm just comparing data, that's a real problem, right? And so if the numbers are not the same, the invoice stops. This is even if you're using some type of AP automation tool, right? And then it requires somebody to manually intervene, if you will. Well, if you use the table and keep it updated during your match process, we'll certainly read that. But the system also has its own cross-reference table that you can teach it as you're going to improve its accuracy. So the longer that you use the tool, the more the more straight-through processing that occurs. So to give you an example, this allows the user, it will throw an error to the user and say, hey, this table, this one doesn't match up the first time they see it. And then it gives them a place to say, do you want us to correct this? We say yes. And the next time it sees this, it won't ask. So to give you an example of sort of what that looks like to a user, you can see on the screen here, these two, the item number on the left is what was invoiced at 1100 CP over there. And on the right, the item number that we ordered was 1100 MM. Now it's the same, but it doesn't match. So it's going to shoot it to the user and say, hey, what do you want to do about this? You want to add this item ID to the AP voucher item cross-reference table? Yes, I do. And then it will happen automatic the next time. Same with units of measure, right? So here's your PO as an example, because a lot of this happens automatically. So we kind of had to pull it in to show you. Here's your PO with your item number, your description, quantity, unit price, etc. And here's the vendor invoice. Everything here in this example matches. We ordered a quantity of 100 and the line amount is $20. So it's all correct. That's an exact match, right? So easy one for us to match. What if the supplier's unit measure is different than you, right? So over on the right, that's probably a more realistic example. So you ordered a quantity of 100, but they sent you a quantity of 50, but they're priced per pair, right? Very common thing. Now, obviously, if it's any of the ones below the one we just looked at, those don't match. We don't want to throw a user this scenario because in reality, they can look at this very quickly and determine that it does match. So what we've got in there is an algorithm that effectively normalizes the data when it's not obvious. So it does a number of calculations behind the scenes to determine if this is in fact the same thing. And if it is, it doesn't present the user. So it truly maximizes the automation for something that is, just basically a calculation that the user, we'd be stopping the user and our straight through processing rate would be lower. So special charges, tax, freight, other things that appear on the invoice but aren't on our PO maybe. And so here you have a little window. It's called what's called AP Voucher 123, and it's actually similar to the one I just showed. In fact, it's the same. But in this one, there's a sales tax item. It's on the invoice, but wasn't on the PO. So obviously we have to do something with that, right? This is the first time the system's seen that. And so we're going to give the user the ability to code this right from here. So with these kind of little tools and components of the system, what does that really do for me? Well, here's a customer example. So we took a customer and processed 260 invoices without these, normalization and for unit measure and the cross-reference. And in that example, 141 went straight through, but 119 required some manual intervention. So just turning on those, normalization and the unit of measure and those kind of things, that gave them 254 straight through versus 6, which required, were probably incorrect. They didn't match for some reason. So these kind of small things, if you will, really allow you to maximize the amount of straight through processing and automated stuff that goes right through the system. And that's really what we're looking for to increase that SDP or straight through processing rate. So we haven't talked a lot about the non-PO side, but obviously it enforces whatever your hierarchy is, because now you have a system that you've created workflows for. You can send out reminders for habitual late approvers and give mobile access to approvers who may not even have access to EBS. So they could get this on their mobile phone, their iPad, etc. And just like before, it's asking the user, hey, this has been routed for approval. What do you want to do? They can have access to not what you're asking them to do, but also the invoice, an image of the invoice. They can even turn the device sideways, for example, and code by line. So if you have, you're a construction organization, for example, or you have a lot of remote facilities or PMs in the field, this user doesn't even have access to EBS, but they can code by line. And basically, again, because of that real-time integration, we have access to read it and display it for the user. And then once my transaction's complete, and my AP transaction here, anytime I want, I've got a picture of this and everything that happened. I can bring up the payment. I can, from wherever I am in EBS. So if I'm in Invoice Inquiry, I could bring up the invoice and then say, you know what, I really want to see this whole transaction. It will show you thumbnails down the bottom of everything connected to this, the payment, receipts, invoice, bill rating, packing list, etc. Again, really more of that traditional ECM functionality. So to kind of wrap up some of the things we've been talking about, AP versus, this a true enterprise sort of or ECM type tool, multi-point integration into ERP is critical, right? What is in EBS, that's the system of record, and we need to be able to access that and use it versus copying that information so it gets out of sync into something else. So the real-time, integration with EBS really maximizes straight-through processing. The ability to handle any of the match requirements that are maybe unique to you, right? I got to match with a quality document or, some catch weight or some other thing. These unit of measure, some of those kind of conversion things that really help you to automate and get things straight through. The cross-reference table capability, the ability to do multiple POs per invoice, subledger type by line, etc. And then the ability to expand throughout the organization, not just the entire organization, but maybe to other areas within finance, capturing journal entry information, attachments, adding packing list, bill ratings, or into those other departments, into HR, etc. So there is a buyer's guide out on our website for AP automation. Just go right to, if you can get out to intellichief.com, it's right under the Oracle EBS section. You can contact us. We're happy to work with you on how your specific process works. We can do customized plans, all that good stuff. So I know I'm a couple minutes over, but thanks everyone for joining me today. A lot of stuff in really a short amount of time. But if you have any questions, go ahead and type those into the box over on the right-hand side, and happy to answer. My contact information is on the screen, so if you want to email me, give me a call. Happy to talk about AP. Love talking about AP. Stunningly. I bet you don't hear that a lot. Well, all right, since I'm over anyway and I don't see anybody typing anything in, I just want to thank everyone. And if you want to share this presentation with folks on your team, you'll get a link to it. And make sure to also, when you get that link, go ahead and respond with how you think I did in this, and be nice. So thanks for everybody for coming today. Appreciate your time. And yeah, please give us a call if we can help.